My husband sided with his ex at the reunion. His mother took my coat and sat beside me. She's standing in her childhood home, hands trembling, when her mother speaks the words that will change everything. If you choose them, you're no longer my daughter. The air goes rigid. Marina looks at the person she's been hiding from her mother for years, then back at her parents' cold expression. She has 30 seconds to decide. The relationship that makes her feel alive, or the family that raised her and gave her everything. Her mother's jaw is set tight. The person she loves holds their breath. And Marina realizes this is the exact moment she's been running from her entire life, the moment where being brave means losing what she thought permanent. Or nothing matters if she doesn't choose herself. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. Tell us where you are watching from and subscribe. I hadn't planned to go back to Whitmore at all. That was the original plan anyway, and I was sticking to it with the same grim determination I'd learned to apply to most things since Marina. But then Harper showed up at my apartment with the invitation tucked into a greeting card covered in terrible glitter, and she gave me the look that had been working on me since the 7th grade, and I knew I was already going to lose this particular battle. "You're not serious," I said, flipping the card open like it might rearrange itself into something less catastrophic. Whitmore Academy's 20-year reunion. A date I'd circled in red ink the moment I graduated, not as a milestone, but as a countdown to the moment I could finally prove something to everyone there. I didn't know what, exactly. That I'd survived? That I'd thrived? That the girl they'd all seen fall apart in the chemistry lab while Marina walked past without a backward glance had somehow managed to become someone worth regretting. "I am completely serious," Harper said, stealing the card from my hands and waving it like she'd just produced a winning lottery ticket. "And you are going to go, and you are going to walk in there, looking like a woman who has not spent the last 5 years rearranging her life around a void named Marina Cross." "I haven't spent the last 5 years doing that," I said, which was a lie so transparent that even my best friend of 23 years laughed directly in my face. "Then you won't mind going back and proving it." She dropped the card on my kitchen counter with the finality of someone placing a bomb. "Cassidy, she's getting married." The room seemed to tilt. I sat down on the nearest stool because my knees had apparently filed for independence. "What?" "Marina. She's marrying someone she met 2 years ago. Violet Hartley. Do you remember her? She was in our year, I think. Or maybe a year ahead. Anyway, she's getting married, and her mother is convinced she should honor her high school roots by attending the reunion before the wedding. So she'll be there, and you can either hide at home, pretending you're still in love with someone who chose someone else over you, or you can be there and let her see exactly what she's been missing. There was a lot to unpack in that sentence, and I refused to unpack any of it. I'm not in love with Marina. I got over that years ago. Harper looked at me the way a person looks at someone who has just tried to convince them that the sky is actually green. "Right. And I'm considering a career in competitive yodeling." "Fine," I said, because sometimes surrender was easier than honesty. "Fine, I'll go. But if this turns into a disaster, I'm blaming you for the rest of your life, and I will be ruthless about it." "That's fair," Harper said, extending her hand like we'd just negotiated a peace treaty. "Shake on it." I shook her hand and tried not to think about Marina. I failed immediately, the way I always did, the way I probably always would. 5 years should have been enough time to build an immunity to the thought of her name. Apparently, 5 years was nothing. It was a blink. It was barely long enough to understand why it had happened. We'd been together for 3 years, Marina and me. Not the kind of relationship that announces itself publicly. Not in high school anyway, though we'd been careful enough that only the people who really knew us understood what it meant when we sat together at lunch, how we moved around each other in the hallways, the way she'd reach back and brush her hand against mine when she thought nobody was looking. We were good at secrets. I think I was always better at them than she was. The thing about loving someone is that eventually, secrets start to feel like lies. Or maybe lies start to feel like a way of protecting what matters. I was never entirely sure which, and Marina wasn't the type to explain. She would get quiet instead. The way she'd gotten quiet at Violet's pool party in the summer before senior year, the summer everything started to fracture around the edges. Violet Hartley had always been the kind of girl who seemed to exist in a constant state of becoming. I remember watching her that afternoon, the way she moved through the party like she owned it, all confidence and ease, and I remember thinking that it must be nice to never doubt yourself, to never wonder if the person you loved was thinking about someone else while they kissed you. But that's not what I should have been thinking about. What I should have understood, what Harper had tried to tell me years later when I finally asked why Marina had started pulling away, was that Violet hadn't been the problem. The problem was that Marina wanted to want someone the way Violet seemed to want things, with certainty, without apology. She came out when you two were already together, Harper had said gently. The first time I'd asked her about it, we were 24, sitting in the same coffee shop where we'd hidden from our parents while planning our college escapes. And I think it scared her. I think she looked at Violet and thought, okay, this is what it looks like to be confident about what you want. And then she looked at you and thought, I don't know how to give her what she needs while being that honest about it. So she left. Except that wasn't how it had happened. It was slower than that, more painful. There were months of Marina checking her phone at dinners we'd planned. Months of her making excuses to work late, to study longer, to spend time with her family. Months of me asking if something was wrong, and her saying, no, everything's fine, I'm just tired, and me knowing she was lying but not being brave enough to insist on the truth. Eventually, she just stopped coming home. And then she sent me a text message. A text message. After 3 years. After talking about building a life together. After making promises that we'd be different. That we'd never be like the couples we saw. We'd never let the world define what we were allowed to feel. The text had said, I think I need some space. I don't know who I am right now. I'm sorry. I'd thrown my phone across the room. I'd cried so hard that Harper had to come over and sit with me while I destroyed the apartment, pulling down the photographs we'd taken together, throwing away the notes Marina had written me, the small gifts, the evidence that we'd ever been anything more than convenient timing and physical need. It had taken me 3 months to find out, through a mutual friend, that Violet had been the space Marina needed, that my ex-girlfriend had found her certainty in someone else's arms, and it had taken me 5 years to build a life that didn't crater every time I saw someone with Marina's hair color from behind in public. So when Harper told me that Marina was marrying Violet, my first response was physiological. My stomach dropped. My hands got cold. I had to grip the counter and breathe through my mouth to keep from getting sick. My second response, once the initial shock had metabolized into something I could almost manage, was resentment. Resentment that she was getting the happy ending. Resentment that it had taken her 3 years with someone else to figure out what she should have learned with me, that love was supposed to be brave, not secret. Resentment that I was going to have to watch them together, and smile, and pretend that I had moved on enough to be happy for her. What are you doing right now? I asked Harper, checking the time on my phone. It was Tuesday. It was 9 in the morning. I was supposed to be at work. I'm taking the day off, she announced. Because you, my friend, are having a crisis, and crisis support is above and beyond normal friendship duty. We are going shopping. We are going to get you something that makes you feel like you just walked off a billboard. And we are going to make sure that when you walk into that reunion, Marina takes one look at you and thinks, oh my God, what have I done? I don't need to punish her, I said, but I was already moving toward my bedroom to find clothes. No, you need to prove something to yourself. But if it happens to devastate her in the process, well, that's just a bonus. Harper appeared in my doorway with the kind of satisfaction of someone who'd already won. Come on. Let's go find you a dress that says I'm not the person you left behind anymore. I'm the person you let slip through your fingers. So that's how I found myself, 6 weeks later, standing in the parking lot of Whitmore Academy, wearing a dress that probably cost more than my rent, shoes that made my feet hurt in a way that felt almost pleasant compared to the panic in my chest, and enough makeup to hide the fact that I'd barely slept in the 3 days since Harper had picked the outfit out. The building looked exactly the same as it had 20 years ago, which was somehow wrong. Whitmore was supposed to have aged along with me. It was supposed to show the cracks that had appeared in the intervening years, the places where nothing had healed properly, the damage that I'd learned to live with. Instead, it just looked like a building. And through those clean glass doors, I could see the gymnasium already filling up with ghosts. Harper squeezed my hand as we climbed the steps. "You're going to be great. You're going to walk in there, and you're going to be so composed, so confident, that everyone is going to wonder how they ever thought you were the broken one when you and Marina split." "I was the broken one," I said. "I spent 3 years with someone who wanted to leave, and I just let her." "No," Harper said firmly. "You spent 3 years with someone who was afraid. That's different. And the fact that you're still angry at yourself for not saving her from her own fear is exactly why you need to be here. You need to see that she chose someone else, and you need to finally believe that choosing someone else had nothing to do with your worth." The gymnasium smelled exactly the way I remembered. Floor polish, that specific kind of high school gym air that's part sweat and part hope. Long tables had been set up around the perimeter with name tags and yearbooks and those little booklets that tell you what everyone's been doing for the past 2 decades. I took my name tag without looking at it and accepted a glass of wine from someone wearing the face of Kyle Hutchinson, who'd sat behind me in biology and spent an entire semester trying to copy my tests. "Cassidy?" he said, his voice moving up at the end like he wasn't sure. "Wow. You look. Wow." "Thank you," I said, because politeness is a safety net when everything else falls apart. I moved away from him quickly, letting the crowd swallow me up, and tried to find a place where I could stand without seeming desperate or friendless. Harper had gone to the bathroom, and I immediately regretted letting her out of my sight. That was when I saw her. Marina was standing by the refreshment table, looking at the appetizers with the slightly confused expression she got when she was nervous. She was wearing a navy dress that looked expensive in that quiet way expensive things sometimes do, and her hair, which she used to wear long when we were together, had been cut into something shorter, sleeker, more confident. She looked happy. That was the thing I wasn't prepared for. I'd thought I would see her, and I would feel something dramatic. Rage, maybe, sadness, definitely longing. Instead, what I felt was something quieter and almost worse, relief that she looked like she'd found whatever she was looking for, paired with the aching knowledge that it hadn't been me. And then, as if she'd felt the weight of my attention the way she always used to, she looked up. Her eyes found mine across the gym, and for a moment, the rest of the room disappeared. She excused herself from the person she'd been talking to, and she started walking toward me, and I suddenly understood that Harper's plan had a fatal flaw. I wasn't the person who'd done the leaving. I was the person who'd been left. And nothing I'd built in 5 years was going to change that fundamental fact about us. "Cassidy," Marina said, and her voice sounded exactly the same as it had in my memory, which meant it sounded different from reality, because it had been 5 years, and 5 years changes everyone. "I didn't know you were coming." "Last-minute decision," I said, which was technically accurate if you considered 6 weeks to be last minute. "How are you?" "I'm good," she said, and then her eyes did that thing where they got softer at the edges, where they looked at me like she was trying to find something in my face that she'd lost. "You look beautiful." "I mean, you always were. But you look really good." The compliment felt like a trap. I didn't take it. Instead, I held still and waited for her to say something that mattered. "I wanted to reach out before tonight," she said, glancing back over her shoulder like she was checking for someone. "I know this probably feels weird. I know it probably feels bad." "What feels bad?" I asked, keeping my voice flat. "You moving on? Finding someone else? Or you not giving me the courtesy of telling me in person?" Her face tightened. "That's not fair." "None of this is fair," I said. But that doesn't seem to have stopped anyone. "Cassidy." "Excuse me." An older woman appeared at Marina's elbow, and I recognized Margaret Cross even though it had been 20 years. She was smaller than I remembered, her dark hair gone almost entirely gray, but her eyes had the same quality of sharp observation that Marina had inherited. She looked at me the way a person looks at something they found on the bottom of their shoe. "I don't believe we've met." "We have, actually," I said, I'm Cassidy. Cassidy Williams. I was friends with Marina in high school. Understanding moved through Margaret's expression like a door closing. Oh, she said, and the single syllable managed to convey judgment, pity, and dismissal all at once. Well, Marina has moved on to much better things now. She's engaged to Violet, a lovely young woman from a very good family. I'm sure you'll see them later. Violet's just getting more punch, I think. She wanted to save some of the good deviled eggs for Marina's father. It was such a calculated move, that statement. It was designed to accomplish a specific thing, to remind me that I was not part of Marina's future, that I was a relic of her past, and that Margaret had decided before we'd even finished this sentence that I was beneath consideration. And it worked. I could feel the accomplishment of it, the smooth operation of social cruelty wearing the mask of politeness. Marina's face had gone a specific shade of pale that I recognized from our senior year, the color she turned when she was embarrassed or ashamed or caught in some moment where her public persona and her private self didn't quite match up. "Mom, don't," Marina said. But her voice was already doing that thing where it was apologizing without actually saying the words. "Cassidy and I are just catching up." "Of course," Margaret said, and she smiled in a way that made it clear she didn't believe her daughter. "Well, don't let me interrupt. Marina, your father wanted to speak with you about the seating arrangements for the wedding. Something about his sister's dietary restrictions. He's over by the bleachers." After Margaret left, there was a silence between us that felt as thick as it was heavy. "I'm sorry about that," Marina said, and her hands were shaking slightly, the way they always did when she was trying to hold something together that was falling apart. "My mom has always been, well, you remember what she's like." I did remember. Margaret had always been the reason Marina kept our relationship secret, had always been the threat that hung over our high school years. Margaret, who believed that there were certain kinds of girls and certain kinds of families, and that the Cross family should never, ever be associated with anything that might question the rightness of that division. "Let me guess," I said, keeping my voice steady. "She doesn't know. About us, about what we were." Marina looked away. She looked at the decorations hanging from the ceiling, the little white lights someone had threaded through the bleachers, the banner that read Whitmore Academy Class of 2004 inches letters that had probably been expensive, anywhere but at me. "No," she said finally. "She doesn't. And I'm not going to tell her. I'm not going to tell her because it wouldn't change anything, and it would only hurt her, and I'm just trying to move forward with my life, okay? Move forward. From me, with someone else." I'd known this already, had known it intellectually, had built my entire recovery on the foundation of that knowledge. But hearing her say it out loud, hearing her use that specific phrase like it was a simple truth that should be obvious to both of us, did something to my chest that I didn't have a name for. "It's nice that you can just move forward so easily," I said, and I could hear the edge creeping into my voice, the anger that I'd thought I'd processed years ago. "It's nice that you can compartmentalize people the way other people compartmentalize their socks." "That's not what I'm doing," Marina said, and now her voice was getting sharper too, which meant we were entering that familiar territory where we would both say things we didn't entirely mean, and then spend weeks undoing the damage. "And honestly, I'm not going to apologize for building a life with someone I love. I'm not going to apologize for being happy." "I didn't ask you to apologize," I said. "I just asked you to be honest. I asked you to tell me what was happening instead of just disappearing." "I did tell you," Marina said, her voice rising now, drawing attention from the people standing nearby, which meant we had about 30 seconds before someone intervened. "I told you I needed space. I told you I was confused. I told you I didn't know who I was. What did you want me to do, Cassidy? What did you want me to say? What I wanted, what I'd always wanted, was for her to choose me, despite the fear. To choose me and accept that choosing me meant accepting the truth about what that meant, what it would cost, who she would have to become. But that wasn't fair, was it? That was asking her to be braver than she was capable of being, and I'd learned the hard way that you can't love someone into bravery. You can only wait and see if they find it on their own. I wanted you to tell me you were leaving, I said, much quieter now. Instead of just leaving, she flinched. Somewhere deep in me, I registered that I'd successfully hurt her, and I felt sick and satisfied in equal measure. This was what it looked like when two people who used to know each other so well decided to become strangers. You kept poking at the wounds until something gave. I need to go, Marina said, and she was already turning away, already looking for the escape route that would get her back to Violet, to her mother, to the parts of her life that didn't require any of this difficult excavation. I'm glad you're here though, really. It's good to see you. She left before I could respond, and I watched her go, watched her disappear into the crowd, and felt something inside me crystallize into a hard, bitter shape. Harper found me about 5 minutes later, holding a glass of wine that had gone warm, staring at a spot on the wall where nothing of importance was happening. What happened? She asked, taking in my face with the kind of accuracy that came from knowing someone for 2.5 decades. What did you do? Nothing, I said. Marina did something, actually. She showed up. She showed up, and her mother took credit for her happiness, and she left before I could say anything else that would make this worse. So you did say something, Harper said, moving me away from my corner and toward the actual party. You're among the living. Tell me what happened. So I told her, and she made the appropriate sounds, and we drank more wine, and for a while it seemed like the evening might actually be survivable. I spoke to people I hadn't thought about in years. I laughed at jokes that were only funny because they brought back memories of simpler times, times when the worst thing I could imagine happening was having to admit that I'd gotten an A- on a test. I even danced a little, though I kept my eye on the doors, kept tracking where Marina was in the room, kept trying to figure out if I'd made a mistake by coming here, or if coming here was exactly what I'd needed to finally let go. It was during one of those dances, right as the DJ was playing that song everyone plays at reunions, because apparently every reunion is obligated to make everyone cry a little bit, that I saw her. Violet Hartley had aged like someone who'd never had to question whether they deserved good things. She was still beautiful. That specific kind of beautiful that comes from confidence and regular exercise, and knowing that the world was built with you in mind. She was wearing a dress that probably cost more than my apartment, and she was wearing Marina's ring on her finger, and she was wearing the expression of someone who'd just won an important game. When she saw me, she smiled. Not a real smile. A smile that said, I know who you are and what you were, and you can see for yourself that Marina made the right choice. And maybe it was the wine. Maybe it was the years of waiting, the years of telling myself that I'd moved on, the years of pretending that I wasn't still checking Marina's social media every few weeks, still reading the captions, still trying to decode what she was feeling, based on which filter she'd chosen for a photograph. Or maybe it was just that I was tired of being the person who'd been left behind. I walked directly over to Violet, held out my hand, and said, Congratulations on the engagement. Marina has wonderful taste in women. The smile on Violet's face faltered, just for a second, just long enough for me to see that she understood exactly what I'd meant by that. She recovered quickly, but I'd already seen the small crack in her certainty, the awareness that she wasn't the only one who'd ever loved Marina, that there was a history there that had nothing to do with her. And somewhere in that history was a girl who'd known Marina better than Violet ever could, who'd seen her at 3 a.m. when she was scared and honest, who'd loved her despite the fear, despite the secrets, despite all of the ways that loving her required sacrificing parts of yourself that should never have been on the negotiating table. Thank you, Violet said, her voice tight. I'm very lucky. Yes, I agreed. You are... I didn't wait to see her reaction. I turned around, found Harper in the crowd, and said, I need to leave. Right now. I need to leave before I do something I'm going to regret, or, alternatively, something I'm absolutely going to enjoy and then feel bad about later. Let's go, Harper said. And she was already steering me toward the doors, was already pulling out her phone to call a car, was already doing that thing where she cleaned up the messes I made by being too honest at the wrong times. We were outside, walking toward the parking lot, when I heard Marina calling my name. Cassidy, wait. I turned around. She was hurrying toward me, her expensive dress moving around her like water, her face flushed with something that looked like emotion, or maybe just the effort of running in heels that weren't designed for athletic pursuits. She was beautiful like this, with her hair slightly disheveled and her composure starting to show the cracks that only happened when she forgot to be careful. "Don't," I said, before she could say anything. "Just don't. I've heard everything you need to say, and I don't have anything left to give you." "You don't know what I'm going to say," Marina said, which was true, but also beside the point. "I do, though," I said. "You're going to tell me that you care about me? That you're sorry things ended the way they did? That you hope I'm doing well? And that I find someone who makes me happy? And it's all going to be true, and it's all going to be meaningless, because you still chose someone else. You still stood in that gym and let your mother speak about Violet like she was the only good choice you could possibly have made. You still made me the past instead of the present." "I wanted to tell you," Marina said, and there were tears in her eyes now, which somehow made it worse. "I wanted to tell my mother that we'd been together, that we were serious, that you mattered to me, but I couldn't. I was terrified. And when I couldn't tell her, I realized that I was going to spend my entire life terrified, and I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that to you. I couldn't keep you in the dark like some secret that I was ashamed of. So you left me," I said. "That was your solution. That was your way of being kind." "I left you because I was a coward," Marina said. "And because I didn't know how to love you and accept myself at the same time. And I know that's not a good enough reason. I know that it doesn't fix anything. But I'm telling you now, and I need you to hear this. You were never the problem. You were never not enough. You were everything, and that's exactly why I had to let go." Harper was holding my arm, and I could feel her trying to telegraph something through her grip. Some message about whether I should listen or whether I should just keep walking. But I couldn't move. Marina had that effect on me still, even after 5 years, even after everything. She could nail me in place with just her voice. "That's not how love works," I said, and my voice sounded small, even to my own ears. "Love isn't supposed to be something you have to let go of. Love is something you hold on to even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult. Love is you choosing me anyway, despite the fear, despite what your mother thinks, despite all of the people who would judge you. Love is you being brave about what you feel." "I know," Marina said, and she was crying properly now, tears streaming down her face without any attempt at dignity or control. "I know that now. That's what I've realized, standing here watching you talk to Violet, watching you walk away from me for the second time, watching myself get everything I thought I wanted, and none of the things I actually need. I know that now, but it's too late." "Yes," I said, "it's too late." And I meant it. I really did. Too late for her to go back. Too late for me to keep believing that if I just waited long enough, if I just became the right person, if I just proved myself to be worthy of her love, she would find her way back to me. Too late for us to be young again and brave again, and convinced that our love was enough to overcome every obstacle that the world placed in our way. I turned around and walked back to Harper's car. And I didn't look back. Not even when Marina called my name again. I didn't look back, because if I looked back, I was going to get pulled into the gravitational orbit of her sadness, and I'd already spent enough years trying to save someone who didn't believe they could be saved on their own terms. In the car, Harper drove in silence for a while, and I stared out the window at the town I'd grown up in, the streets I'd walked with Marina, the places where we'd hidden our love like it was something dangerous and shameful, something that had to exist in shadows. "Are you okay?" Harper asked, finally. "No," I said, "but I will be." "How long?" she asked. "I don't know yet," I said, "but I'm going to find out. And this time, I'm going to find out on my own terms." And that was the thing about the reunion, the thing I didn't understand until I was already home, already alone, already sitting with the full weight of what had happened. Sometimes you have to go back to the place where you broke in order to understand that breaking doesn't have to be permanent. Sometimes you have to look directly at the person who broke you and realize that their inability to love you the way you deserve to be loved doesn't say anything about your worth. It only says something about their fear. I spent the next week doing the things that I'd been too afraid to do when I was younger. I went to the bar and flirted with a woman who wasn't Marina. I wore clothes that made me feel powerful instead of clothes that I thought other people would approve of. I told my mother some careful version of the truth about why I'd left high school with my heart in pieces, and I cried in front of her, and she held me, and she didn't try to fix it or explain it away. And then, exactly 9 days after the reunion, Marina called me. I almost didn't answer. I was sitting in my apartment, drinking coffee that had gone cold, reading the same page of a book for the third time because I couldn't seem to retain any information. Harper had finally stopped checking in on me every 3 hours. I'd finally started being able to go more than 15 minutes without thinking about what Marina had said in the parking lot, about how she'd realized she needed the things she'd given up in order to be with someone who looked less complicated on the outside. But when my phone rang and I saw her name, something that had been tied up in knots inside me loosened just enough to let me say yes. I broke the engagement, Marina said, no preamble, no small talk. I called Violet on Saturday morning, and I told her that I couldn't do this, that it wasn't fair to her to marry me when I was still thinking about another woman, and she was actually very dignified about it. She cried, but she understood. And then I told my mother. I didn't say anything. I was afraid that if I spoke, the entire thing would disappear, would reveal itself to be something I'd imagined in that complicated space between sleep and waking, in that place where we get to rewrite our histories the way we wish they'd happened. I told my mother that I was with you in high school. Marina continued. That I loved you, that I was in love with you, and that letting you go was the biggest mistake of my life. And she did exactly what I was afraid she'd do. She told me I was making a terrible choice, that I was throwing away my reputation, that she was ashamed of me. And you know what I realized? I realized that I've been letting her shame me for my entire life, and it doesn't matter, because I'm going to be ashamed of myself either way. I'm either going to be ashamed that I betrayed her expectations, or I'm going to be ashamed that I betrayed myself. And I'd rather be the first kind of ashamed. Marina, I said. And I still didn't know what I wanted to say after that. I still didn't know if I had the capacity to let her back in, to trust that this was real, and not just another temporary moment of clarity that would evaporate the moment real life got difficult again. I'm not asking you to take me back, she said quickly. I know that what I did hurt you. I know that what I didn't do, the things I didn't say, the courage I didn't find, all of that hurt you in ways that I'm still trying to understand. But I'm asking if maybe, if you're willing, we could try again. Not as who we were, but as who we're becoming. I closed my eyes. I thought about the girl she'd been, 17 and scared, and trying to figure out how to be honest about who she was in a world that wasn't going to make that easy. I thought about the woman she'd become, standing in a parking lot at our 20-year reunion, finally brave enough to say the things she should have said years ago. I thought about what it would cost me to let her in again, to believe that this time she meant it, to risk the part of myself that had just started to feel whole. And then I thought about the alternative. I thought about being 60 years old and running into her at the grocery store, and both of us pretending that we'd never been more than acquaintances. I thought about the kind of regret that calcifies inside you, the kind that doesn't get better with time, only deeper. Okay, I said. But we do this differently. We do this honestly, and we do this in the light. No more secrets, no more waiting for other people to give us permission to be together. Okay, Marina said, and I could hear the smile in her voice, the kind of smile that comes when you've been given a second chance and you're determined to make it mean something. And I need some time, I said. I need to see that you're serious about this, that you're not just running away from Violet to run toward me, that you're actually choosing yourself first. I need to see that you can be brave about being alone before you can be brave about being with someone. I understand, she said. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. And that was the moment, I think, when I started to believe that maybe the reunion wasn't an ending after all. Maybe it was a beginning, or at least the beginning of a new chapter. One where we both got to choose what we wanted instead of what we thought we should want, instead of what other people expected of us. Harper, when I told her what had happened, just smiled and said, "I told you so," which was exactly what she would say, and I let her have that victory because she'd earned it through years of believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. For the next 6 weeks, Marina and I took things slowly. We had coffee. We went to movies. We talked about the years we'd lost and the years we'd wasted, and the years that were still available to us if we were brave enough to claim them. And very slowly, the caution started to give way to something that looked a lot like hope. There was one particular afternoon, though, that changed everything. We were sitting in her apartment, a place she'd rented after leaving her family home, a place that was entirely hers, and therefore felt like a kind of bravery in itself. We were sitting on her couch, and Marina was showing me photographs of her apartment before she decorated it, back when it had been just empty white walls and the possibility of becoming something. "I hung up the photos," she said, pointing to the gallery wall she'd created above the fireplace. "The ones from high school. I put them in albums for years, but I finally decided that I didn't need to hide them anymore." I got up and walked over to look at them. There we were, Marina and me, at different points in our relationship. Marina at the coffee shop where we used to hide from the world. The two of us at the lake, me pretending not to notice the way she was looking at me. Marina in my arms on New Year's Eve, both of us trying so hard to appear casual when the cameras came out. Photo after photo of proof that we'd been real, that we'd existed in that space between who we were supposed to be and who we actually were. I turned back to Marina, and she was watching me with an intensity that made my breath catch. She stood up, closed the distance between us, and took both my hands. "I'm done being afraid," she said. "I'm done hiding. I'm done pretending that what we had was something I needed to be ashamed of. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I'm not going to let you go again." And then she kissed me, and it tasted like apology and redemption and the specific kind of sweet that comes from finally getting something right. It tasted like second chances and brave choices, and the kind of love that doesn't require you to diminish yourself in order to be worthy of it. When we broke apart, I was crying and she was crying and we were both laughing, which made everything feel slightly insane and absolutely perfect all at once. "I love you," Marina said. And this time, she wasn't saying it in a parking lot after a reunion. She was saying it in her own home, in the light, in front of evidence of our history, in front of a choice that she was making every single day and would keep making as long as I was willing to let her. "I love you too," I said, which was the simplest and most complicated truth I'd ever spoken. And that was the thing about going back to that reunion, the thing I never would have understood if Harper hadn't forced me to face it. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us aren't the endings. The worst things are the ways we let those endings convince us that we're not worthy of something better. Sometimes you have to stand in the place where you broke and remember that breaking isn't permanent. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get to stand in that place and realize that the person who broke you is standing there too, finally ready to help you put yourself back together. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's everything. The first 3 months were careful in a way that the reunion had not prepared me for. Not because we were holding back, but because we were both terrified of making the same mistakes we'd made before. Marina would text me in the morning, just simple things. "Good morning. I thought of you. Are you free tonight?" And I would respond with the same kind of small honesty, and we'd build our days around these small confirmations that we were still choosing each other, that this wasn't just a moment of weakness at a reunion parking lot, but something we were both committed to making real. We moved slowly through the physical parts of it too. There was a night, about 2 weeks after the kiss in her apartment, when we were sitting on her couch watching a movie neither of us was actually paying attention to, and Marina reached over and took my hand, just held it. And I felt something in my chest crack open because it was such a small thing, such a gesture that should have been casual, but it felt like the most important promise anyone had ever made me. "I'm scared," she said, not looking at the screen, just staring at our joined hands like they held the answer to every question she'd been afraid to ask. "Of what?" I asked, though I thought I knew. "That I'm going to hurt you again. That I'm going to get scared and run. That this is all going to fall apart because I don't know how to be brave about this the way you are. She finally looked at me, and her eyes were wet. That you're going to realize I'm not worth the risk I'm taking on me. I squeezed her hand. You're going to hurt me again, I said. And I'm probably going to hurt you. That's not what I'm afraid of. What I'm afraid of is that we're both going to play it so safe that we forget why we started this in the first place. And why did we start this? Marina asked. Because, I said. Standing in that parking lot, I realized I'd spent 5 years pretending that loving you was something I needed to recover from. And standing there, watching you choose yourself, I realized that recovering from loving you was impossible. That it was a thing I was never going to do. So I might as well stop trying and start living with it. She kissed me then, and it was slower than the first kiss had been, more deliberate, more like she was trying to memorize the exact shape of it, the exact pressure, the exact moment where breathing stopped mattering, and only the feeling of her mouth on mine was real. When we broke apart, she said, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be a person who loves you in the light. Yes, you do, I said. You're already doing it. You're doing it right now. But the truth was that there were obstacles we hadn't anticipated. Violet, for one, was hurt in a way that made everything feel meaner than it actually was. I ran into her at the grocery store about 3 weeks after the reunion, and the look on her face when she saw me was the look of someone who understood, fully and without question, that she'd lost something she'd thought was secure. I wanted to apologize. And I wanted to tell her that she hadn't done anything wrong, that Marina had just been choosing the wrong thing for the right reasons, and sometimes love has to come first. But I didn't say any of that. I just nodded, and she nodded back, and we moved past each other in the cereal aisle like two people who'd been on a collision course and had finally accepted it. Margaret was worse. Margaret called Marina 3 weeks into our reconciliation and demanded that we all sit down for a family dinner to discuss what was happening. Marina agreed because she was trying to build bridges with her mother, trying to become the kind of daughter who could be honest about who she was while still respecting the family she came from. I told her she didn't have to do this. I told her that she owed her mother nothing except honesty, and that was something Margaret had already rejected. But Marina wanted to try. So we went. The dinner was at Margaret's house. The house Marina had grown up in. The house where she'd learned to hide herself in the spaces between her mother's expectations and her own truth. Margaret had made pot roast, which felt like either a peace offering or a threat, and I couldn't decide which. She seated us at the formal dining table, the one that was supposed to be reserved for special occasions, and I understood that this was Marina's way of showing that she understood the gravity of what was happening. Margaret looked at me like I was something that had been tracked in from the street. I understand you and my daughter are seeing each other again, she said, and the way she said it made it clear that she understood nothing, that all she was doing was trying to maintain control over a situation that had spiraled out of her reach. Yes, I said, because there was no point in being anything other than direct with Margaret. We are. I see, Margaret said. She cut into her pot roast with the kind of precision that suggested she was imagining she was cutting something else entirely. And you think that's appropriate, given your history? Given the fact that you've already caused my daughter considerable pain once? Marina's hand found mine under the table, and she squeezed, and I understood that this was where I was supposed to fight back, where I was supposed to defend myself or defend her, or defend the relationship we were building. But I looked at Marina instead, and I saw the girl she'd been, 17 and terrified, sitting at this same table while her mother explained why certain things were not acceptable, why certain feelings were dangerous, why certain kinds of people would never bring anything but shame to the Cross family name. I don't think it's appropriate, I said finally. I think it's necessary, and I think your daughter has waited long enough for your permission to be herself. Margaret's face went red. You don't know anything about my daughter's life. You don't know what she's been through, what she's had to overcome. I know that she spent 3 years of her life with me pretending to be someone else because she was afraid of what you would think, I said, and I could feel Marina's grip on my hand tightening. I could feel her trying to send me some kind of signal to stop, but I couldn't stop now. I'd spent too many years apologizing for the space that Marina and I had occupied together. I know that she let me go because she couldn't figure out how to love me and love herself at the same time, and I know that's her tragedy, but it's your tragedy too, because you made it so that she felt like she had to choose. That's quite enough, Margaret said, standing up. I think it would be better if you left. I looked at Marina. Marina was very still, her face carefully composed, her hand still holding mine. No, Marina said quietly. I think it would be better if you listened. Margaret turned to look at her daughter, and for a moment, the resemblance between them was striking. They had the same stubborn set to their mouths, the same way of holding themselves when they were preparing to defend something they believed in. But Margaret had learned to use that posture to protect the status quo, and Marina was learning to use it to protect herself. I love Cassidy, Marina said, and she was standing now too, pulling me up with her. I've loved her for more than 20 years. I loved her when it was a secret, and I'm going to love her now that it's not. And I don't need your approval to do that. But I would very much like your acceptance. Because you're my mother, and I want to be able to bring her to family dinners without feeling like I'm betraying you by being honest about what she means to me. She means more to you than your family does, Margaret said, and it wasn't a question. It was an accusation. She means everything to me, Marina said. And that doesn't diminish what my family means to me. It just means I've finally understood that I can't build a life on shame. Margaret looked at both of us, standing there in her dining room, holding hands like we were daring her to make us let go. I could see the moment she realized that she'd already lost this battle. That Marina wasn't going to fold. Wasn't going to become the daughter she'd always wanted. Wasn't going to pretend that years of running from herself had somehow made her into someone worth being. If you leave this house with her, Margaret said, I'm not sure how welcome you'll be when you come back. It was a threat, but it was also an olive branch, because she was implying that eventually Marina would come back. That eventually Marina would need something from her mother, and when she did, the door might still be open. Marina looked at me, then she looked at her mother. And then she said, That's a risk I'm willing to take. We left the house, and we didn't go back for 3 months. During that time, Marina's father reached out privately, and they had coffee, and he told her that he loved her, and that he was proud of her, and that he would always have a relationship with her even if her mother was struggling. It wasn't everything, but it was something. The weeks that followed the dinner were tender in a way that everything before had not been. Marina was grieving, even though she wouldn't have used that word. She was grieving the version of her mother that she'd always hoped would come around, the version that would accept her without condition, the version that would choose her daughter's happiness over her own limited understanding of the world. I spent a lot of time holding her while she cried. I spent a lot of time telling her that she'd done the right thing, even though doing the right thing had cost her something. I spent a lot of time falling deeper in love with her. Because watching her choose herself and choose me, over and over again, knowing what it cost her, that was something that broke open the last protective walls I'd built around my own heart. There was one night, about 4 months into our reconciliation, when we were lying in bed together, and Marina asked me something she'd never asked before. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't gone to the reunion? She asked. I thought about it. I thought about the version of my life where I'd stayed home, where Harper hadn't shown up with an invitation and a determined expression, where I'd never had to stand in a gymnasium and watch Marina choose someone else for the second time. No, I said finally. I'm glad I went. I'm glad it happened the way it did, because it got us here. Even though it was horrible? Marina asked. Especially because it was horrible, I said. Because we're not building this on nostalgia or memory. We're building it on the fact that we both walked into that reunion knowing that it might destroy us, and we came out the other side anyway. That's a kind of strength that we didn't have before. She was quiet for a long time after that. Then she said, I want to propose to you. I laughed, because the statement had come out of nowhere, had landed in the silence between us like a meteor. What? Not tonight, she said. Not tomorrow, but sometime. When you're not expecting it, when I've had time to plan something that feels like it matches the way I feel about you. I want to propose to you, and I want to marry you, and I want to spend the rest of my life being brave about what you mean to me. Yes, I said, not waiting for the proposal, not needing the romance or the grand gesture, just needing to know that she was serious, that this wasn't some temporary moment of clarity that would fade when real life got difficult. Yes to all of that. Yes to everything. She kissed me in the dark, and it felt like a promise, and it felt like the beginning of the rest of our lives. The proposal happened on a beach in Portugal, which is not where I thought it was going to happen. Marina had told me we were going on a work trip for her, that she'd have meetings during the day, and that I was welcome to come along and explore. I'd taken a leave of absence from my job, which was something I would have thought was impossible 6 months earlier, but Marina had a way of making impossible things feel inevitable. We were walking along a cliff path at sunset, and the light was doing that thing where it turns everything the color of honey, and Marina stopped me and said, "I need to tell you something." I thought she was going to break up with me. I thought the last 6 months had been a beautiful aberration, a moment where we'd both let ourselves believe that second chances existed, and now reality was reasserting itself. I got ready for the worst, and then Marina dropped to one knee, and I realized that I'd been wrong about everything except for the important part. We were still here, we were still choosing each other, and we were going to keep doing that until one of us died, or the world ended, whichever came first. Cassidy Williams, Marina said, pulling a small ring from her pocket, a ring that looked like it had been designed by someone who understood me, who understood the balance between elegance and strength that I'd always tried to embody. "Will you marry me?" I said yes. I said yes before she'd even finished the question. I said yes, and pulled her up and kissed her in front of the sunset and a couple of bewildered tourists who took approximately 4,000 photos of the event. The wedding planning took 6 months. We did it together, made all the decisions together, and there was something deeply healing about that process. We chose the flowers together. We wrote our vows together, or at least we sat in cafes and dictated pieces of them to each other, and then we rewrote them alone, and then we shared them, and they were devastatingly perfect. Marina's vow included this: "You were the first person who made me understand that I didn't have to be ashamed of loving deeply. You taught me that courage doesn't mean not being afraid. It means being afraid and doing the thing anyway. And I promise to spend the rest of my life doing the thing, with you, even when it's terrifying." My vow included this: "You taught me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone go, and the second bravest thing is let them come back. I promise to never make you regret either one of those choices." The wedding itself was small, which had been a non-negotiable point for both of us. We didn't want a production. We wanted the people who loved us, and we wanted to stand in front of them and claim each other the way we'd been afraid to do for so long. Margaret didn't come. She sent a card with a check in it, which was her way of saying that she was still trying, even if she didn't understand. That was enough for Marina, or at least it was enough for her to stop grieving the version of her mother that had never existed. Harper was there, of course, standing as Marina's best woman, crying the entire time, because Harper had believed in this ending when neither Marina nor I had been brave enough to believe in it ourselves. My parents were there, and Marina's father was there, and my sister and her family were there, and about 15 other people who'd become important to us over the years we'd been apart and the months we'd been back together. Nothing grand. Nothing that would have looked impressive in a magazine. But everything that mattered, all condensed into one afternoon of honesty and light, and the specific kind of joy that comes from finally being allowed to be fully yourself in front of everyone you love. The reception was in a restaurant overlooking a garden, which was Harper's idea because she believed that beauty was important even when it was just for us. We danced to a song that Marina had chosen, a song that had been playing when we first met in high school at someone's pool party, before everything got complicated, before we learned what it meant to be afraid. At one point during the reception, Violet showed up. She had gotten the invitation, and I hadn't been sure if she would come, hadn't been sure if she could stand to watch Marina marry me after Marina had left her at the altar, so to speak. But there she was, sitting at a table with a glass of wine, watching us dance. I made a decision. I walked over to her during a pause in the music, and I asked her to dance with me. "Why?" she asked. And she didn't sound hostile, just curious. "Because I owe you an apology," I said. "Not for loving Marina, but for not being kinder about how it happened. You didn't deserve what happened to you. She took my outstretched hand and we danced, and while we danced, she said, I knew, you know. Even at the reunion, I knew that Marina was still in love with you. I thought if we just got married, if we just moved forward with our lives, she would eventually choose me. But you can't make someone choose you over their own truth. And that's the thing I didn't understand until she left me. Sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for someone is let them go, even if it destroys you. We both understood in that moment that we were grieving the same person, though we were grieving different versions of her. And there was something bonding about that. Something that allowed us to forgive each other for being on opposite sides of Marina's journey toward herself. When the song ended, Violet hugged me, and she hugged Marina, and she told us to take care of each other. Then she left, and I never saw her again, though Marina got a holiday card from her every year, just a simple message. Thinking of you. Happy holidays. The years that followed were not without complication. Marina and I had to learn how to fight without it feeling like the end of everything. We had to learn how to apologize without it feeling like a betrayal. We had to learn that love was not a static thing that you achieved and then maintained, but something that required constant choice, constant effort, constant small acts of bravery. But we did it. We learned. And we grew. Margaret eventually came around, though it took her 5 years. She called Marina one day and said, I've been thinking about what you said at dinner, about building a life on shame. And I realized I'd built my entire life on it, and it's made me lonely. I don't want to be lonely anymore. So she started coming to family dinners again. She started getting to know me, actually getting to know me, and she started understanding that I wasn't the person she'd blamed for making Marina choose herself. I was just the person Marina had been brave enough to choose. Harper's role in our lives never diminished. She was there for every milestone, every crisis, every small victory. She was the godmother to our children, when we eventually had them. She was the person we called in the middle of the night when Marina had a nightmare about the years she'd lost, and the person we called on the day Marina got promoted at work, and the person we called when we sold our first house together. Marina and I built a life that was not unlike the one we'd imagined when we were young and not yet afraid. We had a home where we could be ourselves. We had careers that meant something to us. We had a marriage that other people looked at and thought, oh, that's what love looks like when you stop running from it. There was one particular moment, though, years into our marriage, that crystallized everything that we'd learned. We were at our 10-year reunion, the reunion we'd attended for Marina's 20-year reunion, and we walked in together, and people understood immediately. They saw us holding hands. They saw the way Marina looked at me. They saw the wedding rings that we wore. And they understood that this was not a new development. This was something that had existed long before they'd given us permission to claim it. Kyle Hutchinson came up to us and said, I remember when I thought you two were just friends in high school. I was so stupid. You were young, I said. We were all young. Still, he said, even then it was obvious. You looked at her like she'd hung the moon. I still do, I said. And Marina squeezed my hand. We left the reunion early that night, not because it was painful, but because we wanted to be alone together, the way we'd always wanted to be, the way we'd finally learned how to be, without apology or shame. In the car on the way home, Marina reached over and took my hand, just the way she'd done on that first night we'd reconciled, just the way she still did, even after all these years, even after she knew for certain that I wasn't going to leave. I love you, she said, which were words we'd said 1,000 times, but which still landed with the weight of a promise, the weight of a choice. I love you too, I said. And I meant it the way I'd always meant it, with the specific kind of desperation that comes from nearly losing something and then being given a second chance at it. We drove home through the city we'd grown up in, past the coffee shop where we'd hidden, past the lake where we'd pretended not to notice how we looked at each other, past the school where we'd first met and learned the shape of loving someone in silence. And I thought about that girl I'd been, at 17, sitting in a gymnasium watching Marina Cross pass by and not knowing that I was already bound to her for life, that I would spend the rest of my days either loving her openly or loving her secretly, but loving her nonetheless. And I thought about the woman I'd become, who'd been brave enough to let Marina go, but braver still, to let her come back. Sometimes the best endings are the ones that don't actually end. Sometimes they just keep spiraling forward, deeper and richer and more complicated and more beautiful, because you're building them with someone who's learned what you had to learn, that love is not a luxury, and it's not a shame. It's the only honest thing you get. Years later, when Harper asked me the secret to making it work, to making a second chance at love actually stick, I told her the truth. The secret is that there is no secret. There's just two people who are willing to be devastated by each other, and then willing to be brave about it anyway. There's just the decision, made every single day, to choose the person you loved over the life you thought you were supposed to live. There's just the understanding that the bravest thing you can do is not to never be hurt by someone. The bravest thing is to let someone hurt you and come back for more. Marina and I spent the last years of our lives still holding hands in cars, still watching sunsets on beaches, still finding reasons to be grateful for the moment at a reunion when we'd finally understood that second chances are real, and that sometimes the person you loved most in the world is also the person who could destroy you most, and that both of those things are true at the same time. And that's exactly why it matters. The thing about loving someone is that eventually, you stop counting the years you lost. You stop measuring the time you spent apart. You start counting instead the number of mornings you woke up next to them, the number of times they made you laugh, the number of moments where you understood, with absolute clarity, that this was the person you were supposed to spend your life with, and that every complicated, painful, messy thing that led you to this moment was worth it. And that's the thing I want you to understand if you've ever loved someone and lost them. If you've ever thought that the wrong choice had been made, that the universe had taken something precious and destroyed it, the universe didn't destroy it. The universe just bent it, twisted it, rearranged it so that it would come back to you in a different form, with new understanding, with new bravery, with new capacity for love. Marina is asleep beside me as I say this, her hand resting on my chest, her breathing slow and even, the breathing of someone who is no longer afraid. And I am grateful for this moment, and for all the moments that led to this moment, and for the moments that are still to come. I am grateful for the reunion that broke us. I am grateful for the parking lot where Marina finally told the truth. I am grateful for every difficult conversation, every tear, every moment where we chose each other despite the fear. And I am grateful, most of all, for the understanding that love is not something that happens to you. Love is something that you choose, over and over again, until it becomes the foundation of who you are, until the person you love is not a luxury or a secret, but a necessity, until the thought of being apart from them becomes unimaginable, and the thought of being together becomes the simplest, most obvious truth in the world. That's the ending. Not a wedding, though there was that. Not a romantic moment, though there were many. The ending is this. Two people who learned how to love each other by almost losing each other, and who spent the rest of their lives making sure they never had to know what that felt like again. The ending is the life you build with someone after you've stopped being afraid. The ending is the realization that the best love stories are not the ones that start perfect. They're the ones that almost break you, and then teach you how to put yourself back together with the person you love right there beside you, doing the same thing. We made it. After everything, against the odds, despite the fear, we made it. And if we can make it, then so can you. That's what I want this story to tell you. That second chances exist. That love is worth the risk. That the bravest thing you can ever do is let someone love you the way you deserve to be loved. And that sometimes, if you're very lucky, the person who broke your heart is also the person who's going to spend the rest of their life making sure it never breaks the same way again.